Well, welcome to the very first episode of It's Only Rock and Roll. We love it, don't we, Russ? Russ
We
is
certainly do.
mastermind behind this and co-producer. So, lined up for this very first episode, there was a preview, of course, but for this episode, two legendary guys from the world of production when it comes to rock and roll. These guys have worked with everyone star-wise from A to Z. We're talking about Aerosmith right through to probably ZZ Top and a multitude of people in between. So, some amazing insights coming from our two guests who's going to be introduced on this podcast now by Russell. Over to you, mate.
Yeah, I'm really pleased you guys have been able to come on. I'm very excited about the first podcast. Obviously, Jake Duncan, we'll start with you, mate, because you're the most senior. I won't give too much away there. Probably,
Steve's loving you saying that.
Yeah, nearly
That's
55.
very rare for me.
Yeah, nearly 55 years, I would think, something like that, isn't it, Jake?
72 was my first gig.
Oh gosh. Anyway, I can't even work out, Steve. So anyway, and Steve, I think 45 years. Well,
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I'd like to first just go on to Jake, if you permit me, Steve.
Of course.
Jake, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry for our listeners. Maybe you can just, if you can remember.
I was just a local musician in Edinburgh, and at that point, this band, the Bass at the Roars, they'd had one hit. They'd covered an old Gentry song in 1971 called Keep On Dancing, which made it to number 9 in the charts. The band themselves had been going since 1965 locally, and they were quite a phenomenon in Scotland. But, they still really hadn't broken that nationally. They traded a little bit off of Keep On Dancing. So I was in the music store. I was a bad drummer picking up some drumsticks. And one of the two crew guys came into the store complaining about the fact that he had to drive to Bournemouth for a gig in 2 days, and the other roadie had quit. So it was just one of these light bulb moments. And I thought, they're going to hang, drawn, and quarter me this weekend if I don't turn up for my own gig. But I think there's an opportunity here. So I just said, hey, I'll do it. I'll go with you. And off I went to the Chelsea Village in Bournemouth, which is just across the way from the pavilion that Steve and I have done a few times. It's gone now, the Chelsea Village. That was me.
So that was your starting point, Jake. And across now to Steve, and very much the same sort of thing. How did you get involved in this fascinating and world of rock and roll?
Complete fluke, as I think most of us have these fluke moments. I was going to go and work in holiday camps. So I just finished this awful apprenticeship, which I won't go into, and I went to see a band in the Half Moon in Herne Hill, and they were a band called 9 Below Zero. And they were a South London band, and I was obviously a South London boy with my brother and all my mates, and just fell in love with them. And I started to follow the band, became friends with them, and they were just going from pubs into clubs, and they were looking for like someone to maybe do a bit of backline. And because I played a bit of guitar, I kind of understood the rudimentary sort of parts of that kind of job. And they asked me if I would like to come along for a few months to help out. And from then onwards, I always assumed that I would get a proper job. I always thought it would be just like a temporary thing. But as you said, Russ, it's been 45 years. And then, I don't want to go ahead too quickly for you, but then that management team eventually ended up managing Nick Kershaw. And that kind of then segued into my first proper kind of production role, really. But anyway, that's maybe moving forward too quick.
So 9 Below Zero, very much sort of early mod days and sort of...
Yeah, they were the first band ever on... what's the Young Ones? We were the first band were on there.
Yes, one lineup.
Yeah, originally we had no idea what that show was. We just turned up at BBC Broadcasting at Shepherd's Bush and asked to set up our gear in the living room, and we did the pilot of the Young Ones, and they had some sort of decent success. They went from pubs to about Hammersmith, Apollo kind of level. So it was great, and they were doing about 250 gigs a year. So I learned a lot very quickly.
A lot of gigs. So the young ones, and
Oh,
it's a young one lineup here on the podcast. It's only rock and rolling. And Jake, I mean, starting with the Bay City Rollers, I mean, there's a lot of stories there, no doubt. And one I'll bring up at some point or other. But how did you move on from the Bay City Rollers to the other aspects of management in rock and roll, and which sort of bands did you get involved with?
Well, actually, as it was starting to all go a bit awry with the Rollers in mid 1975, I was a fairly avid reader in those days of both the New Musical Express and the Melody Maker, and I spotted an ad in the Melody Maker for a roadie to work with a European and American touring band. I didn't know who it was, applied for the advert, turned up at Chrysalis Records in London. It was Jethro Tull, and they they were very, very self-sufficient at that time. They had their own sound system in the UK. They had their own 16-ton truck. So they needed somebody with an HGV.
Mm.
Well, I'd been driving a lot of big vans, but I didn't have an HGV. And the guy said to me, the tour manager, listen, I've got a guy here from Glasgow, funny, I've got an HGV1. He's right in the frame for this job and he's got experience. If you can go away and just get an HGV3 so you can drive the 16-tonner, because when they rehearsed or they recorded, they always did it out in Europe for tax purposes. So away I went, I got the HGV3 and I got the job. And then before I knew it, I was sitting behind Barry Barlow in the Deutschlandhalle in Berlin, totally awestruck that he had to throw a drumstick at me in the middle of the first song and yelled at me, "Pay attention, you dumb Scotsman," he said.
Steve, you obviously explained about, when you realized that it was, this is probably going to be a job now. Was there sort of a light bulb moment, you reckon, where you thought, I could probably make a living at this?
Well, do you know what it was? It was all my mates who kind of left school with me, and my pub mates, who the 9 Below Zero gang. Were all in banks and post offices, and assumed they had jobs for life. And then I saw them all kind of being laid off and all out of work and that. And I was sort of like making a little decent living, and I thought maybe this could be my vocation, But I was always waiting for the rug to be pulled from under me, and I think I still am, to be honest with you. I feel a bit of a bluffer at times. I think we all have that imposter syndrome, don't we? Sometimes? But yeah, so yeah, no, it's been a 45 years, and it's not what I expected at all in my life, to be honest.
It's very funny you'd mention that imposter syndrome, because I remember with myself, I really hadn't got any work, and someone said, I can't remember who it was from now. It was with a band called Lone Justice from America, and they said, "Oh, you can do guitars, can't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like, "Oh shit, how am I going to do that? I can't, never played a guitar, never tuned a guitar." So I ran up to an old friend of mine who had a band, and I said, "Give me a crash course. I've got to go out. I'm going out on the road tomorrow on how to tune guitars," which he did, and I bluffed my way through it. I mean, dear oh dear. I remember one comical episode at the Nuremberg Ring. I don't know if you ever did that gig. But I mean, wow. We were on at 10:30 in the morning. 10:30 in the morning, and I'd just driven from London to Hamburg and Hamburg to London. I was absolutely out of my tree. I just couldn't function. And I remember we used to play tricks on the band all the time, and the guitarist broke a string in the first song, threw me the guitar. I went to reach in and I did everything. I did everything wrong, and it was all backwards, and gave it back to him, and he thought I was just playing a prank on him, but no, I wasn't. I really was, but that I nearly blew my cover then. But so I can relate to that.
Russell, that reminds me of when you said about bluffing it, not knowing what to do. A quote from Richard Branson. He said, "Important thing is get the job. Doesn't matter if you don't know anything about it. Get the job and then learn how to do it." That's what you did. So
definitely. I mean, I just a quick thing about guitar tech. I was the worst guitar tech in the world. I mean, there's no one good worse than me. I mean, I bluffed my way with Nick Kershaw, and the guy's an amazing guitarist. And then they handed me his guitar the first time I ever worked with him, and he had one of those. Where all the tuning's at the bridge as opposed to machine hits. And I'd never seen it before in my life, And he was so I mean, he just sussed me out. I mean, I think Nick realised that I was a bluffer, but for some reason he let it go. But perhaps he quite liked me. But yeah, oh my God, that
Jake,
was
Jake would probably back me up on this. When we work with people like, there's loads of them, but people like Dave Davis. Was it
yeah.
Dave Davis?
Yeah, guitar tech.
Davis.
Yeah, he'd throw a guitar in the air and it come down like tuned and mended. People like it's just like.
I thought you meant Dave Davis from the Kinks. Yeah.
No. Anyway, Jake, any recollections of funny shenanigans from those early days when we were all bluffing it?
Well, you talk about bluffing it. I actually covered for the Bay City Rollers drummer for about 4 or 5 shows when he had to go into hospital. They tried to get a drummer from another band that was in the same management stable, but they had a load of gigs. So I said, listen, yeah, I think I can do this. I've been watching it every night for months and months. And I was definitely a below average drummer. That week, I got myself 30 quid a week. They doubled my wages from 15 to 30 when I played in the band. And I thought, this is it. I've arrived. Yeah.
And you had hair then?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You did.
So you hit the big time, doubling your wages by standing in as a drummer for the Bay City Rollers.
Yeah. So in the most notable lineup, let's just call it the famous 5, the successful lineup, I was the only one that ever played drums that are ever deputised for Derek.
Yeah.
Have you still got the flared shorts?
Sorry.
Have you still got the flared shorts, the flared tartan shorts?
No tartan in my house.
Yeah,
no thanks.
Yeah, but people forget, don't they, that Bay City Rollers, what an absolutely huge band they was, and also how they were very, very quick in their career trying to break America. Because I've seen photographs and video of Jake in the States with Bay City Rollers in the very early 70s as well.
Well, they were just about to call it a day when Phil Coulter and the Scottish lads, his writing partner, Bill. Come to me. They had the last shot in the UK. They released a song called Saturday Night that didn't really go anywhere, and it went huge in America. It went to #1 in America, and the whole thing just took off vastly in America.
So Jake, were they going to call it a day because you were drumming for them? Is that
problems and Jake?
Yeah. If you heard my drumming, you'd want to call it a day as well.
So, Jake, quick one regarding the Americans. What was the appeal for why do they like the Bay City Rollers so much? What was the big appeal there, do you think?
I think it was just a team thing. They'd had Donny Osmond. I can't recollect exactly where we fell into it chronologically, but what Steve was saying is the one amazing thing about this band is that 95% of the kids coming to the show were dressed like the band. Now, you do get factions of fans with certain bands that are dressed that way, or for Bowie, one of the acts that Steve worked for, but predominantly you looked out into that audience, it was just a sea of tartan.
Phenomenal, absolutely. Steve, across to you now. Now, in the early days of your career, which has been pretty extensive to say the very least, a big event came along, Live Aid. Was it the 13th of July, 1985? You were involved in that. So what was your impression of Live Aid? And go through some of the things you remember most about that big event.
Well, I came at it from 2 angles, actually, which is kind of quite unique, if I say so myself, because as well as working for Nick Kershaw at the time, who was on relatively early on the day, I was also working for Harvey Goldsmith. So I was privy to all of I saw the meetings going on with Midge and with Bob Geldof and Andrew Zweck, who Russell and Jake know very well. Legend, absolute mentor of mine. So, and then I was also
in rock and roll.
Yeah, and then I was also Harvey's secretary couldn't work the. Do you remember emails had just come out at that time, the Tandy and that, and they couldn't download their emails, and so the American, who was the promoter in America? It was Bill, wasn't it? Bill.
Graham.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
Paul Graham died in a helicopter crash afterwards. But Harvey was pulling his hair out with the Americans. He was going nuts at them because they could not get their head around the fact that people were expected to work for no fees, So he was going, yeah, but I've got to give the caterers money. I've got to give the riggers money. And Harvey's going, no, you don't. Can we swear on this?
Yeah, you can do what you want.
I said, you don't fucking get it. You don't fucking understand. It's like everyone does it for nothing. So he really, and in the end, Andy Zweck and Pete Wilson and Harvey had to fly out to the States about 2 weeks before the Philadelphia show just to try and show them how to put on a big charity event, So I was privy to all that as well. But of course, on the day, it was incredible. I mean, we all arrived. I don't know if Jake was there that early because he was with George, I think. But we all arrived at 9 o'clock at the conference centre. They used that as this kind of big communal meeting point, and it was like going into a big locker room, changing room, and all the bands were sort of like warming up, all sitting on these little benches and that, waiting to be ferried up to backstage at Wembley. And it was like everyone you'd ever known and I'm talking about there was no egos, there was no staffing. Everyone just came in together, shaking hands, talking about stuff, and then we all got ferried up backstage to our dressing rooms, porter cabins or whatever they were.
So there's a strong camaraderie amongst the stars. Have you seen on a smaller scale anywhere else since Live Aid?
Sorry?
Yeah, that strong camaraderie, no egos being involved amongst all those big names, those stars. Have you seen it anywhere else since Live?
No, in fairness, I mean, I think it was the first. Let's be honest. I think it was really. I mean, I know there was Woodstock and all that kind of stuff, but I don't recall anything of this size and yeah. I don't think that we had any comparison before that. This was a brand new idea, and to get all these stars on board, and as we all know, the famous story of no sound checking and the cake stage where divided into 3 parts, one band setting up, one band playing, one band coming off. I mean, it was never really been done before, unless Jake knows more than me. I wasn't aware of it.
I mean, Jake, I wanted to ask you actually, because I remember watching it from my garden. I had the TV out in the garden because it was a beautiful day, wasn't it?
It was amazing.
But do you remember, Jake? I think we were possibly getting ready to go with Wham to Wham America. And you just took George and did it. Is that what happened? Were we in rehearsals and we'd just come back from China or something? Am I getting my dates wrong?
I seem to think now it was either this or it was the Nelson Mandela tribute, but it all happened at fairly short notice for George. We were in Europe. Yeah, we were finishing up Europe. So the only place we needed to rehearse some of those songs, even though George was singing with other musicians. His band agreed that they would run through some of the songs with him. But the only rehearsal hall we could find was in Hamburg and about 5 blocks from the Reeperbahn. So I sent the crew down there to get set up, etc. And I turned up at lunchtime and there was no crew there.
Oh, Jake, of course there wasn't. They're all down the Reeperbahn.
Yeah.
No, you're funny. The thing, obviously, it was quite easy for me because it was just a case of marching George on. But one of the things that I recall from Live Aid is back then, they used a blimp. And when Elton John sang Rocket Man and he got to the line of the song, "When Are You Gonna Come Down?" they zoomed from that stage right back up to that blimp. Brilliant camera shot. It's one of the few things that I remember from that day. It's a fairly manic day, but yeah, good bunch of people.
Yeah. That was amazing. And watching, I mean, I was very lucky to actually watch Queen. When I say I watched Queen from the side of stage as much as you could be side of stage that day, but I was relatively close. And I knew at the time they were just killing it. They were just, I mean, that performance was unbelievable. And that band and that management team just got that whole day above everybody else. They did the medleys, and they were just they just stole the
And they
day.
didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it, did they, Steve? To start with, they had
Well,
to be.
also people forget that they were a bit coming down. They were over the arc almost. They were not as big as they've been. They were sort of playing. They wasn't playing stadiums. They were playing arenas and that. No, they wasn't really keen, and they were kind of. There was a lot. I remember some people being quite anti-Queen on the bill because they thought they were a bit past their sell-by date. Unbelievable, isn't it?
And a special mention to Status Quo for starting the show with "Rocking All Over the World." That was a runner-up to Queen's performance for me.
Yeah. And they were so clever there as well because they asked for that starting spot because one, they knew they'd get a sound check, and the only band probably did. But also they knew to start that show. People still talk about them now, Status Quo, in the context of Live Aid, and so many other bands are just forgotten about on the day because they had that incredible opening spot.
So, Steve, what was your actual role at the show, Live Aid?
Well, it was just typical. I was just backline person with Nick Kershaw. I'd been doing Nick Kershaw's tours, and so I was just his backline person. It was before my first production management role, so I was just being the average guitar tech, the biggest bluffer guitar tech in the world on the biggest show in the world.
A fabulous experience for you, and one which you'll probably never ever forget.
Yeah, absolutely crapping myself as well, but. Yeah, so it was, but it was amazing to be there. It was incredible, great day.
I had a very slight connection with Live Aid from a remote distance. I was in the early days of my broadcasting career. I was working at BBC Radio Stoke, and I got thrown in at the deep end to host a 4.5-hour afternoon show on a Saturday, and it was basically going out and about to all different places with a outside broadcast van. And on this occasion, the producer said, "Right, throw it at me. We're going live to Wembley now to speak to someone regarding the show." And it was a namesake. It was Andy Kershaw, who got thrown in the deep end to host it for probably BBC Two at the time or whatever. We were sort of dipping in and out every sort of half hour with some reactions and inserts from stateside with the guys from TV.
It was iconic. It was an iconic thing in rock history. There's no talks about it.
Yeah, it's really strange as well, Russ, is that everyone was relatively blasé about all the other bands who were playing. Like the only everyone was starstruck about McCartney because, as we all know at the time, he hadn't been on stage for 10 years since Wings, I think. And it's funny, the side of the stages were relatively quiet. Everyone else was in the Hard Rock Cafe backstage, but when McCartney came on, literally every star, every rock and roll icon that day rushed to the side of the stage to rubberneck McCartney. And then sadly, as we all know, he had so many technical issues, and the only artist on the day that had technical issues on, it was a shame.
Can I just just reeling back, I'll have to remind you of this, which is a bit of going off on a tangent, but if you remember, my son, you were working for Madness, and my son had picked up an old tape in this secondhand car I had that only had a tape player. The radio didn't work, everything, and I had this one tape, and it was One Step Beyond. It was One Step Beyond. That one there, I can see it at the back there of your thing, and he used to play it over and over again. He knew all the words. He was a nutty boy. He called himself a nutty boy. He was about 5 or 6 years old. And I got in touch with him. I said, "Are you doing Brighton?" He said, yeah, we're doing Brighton. It was around the Christmas time. I said, "Well, I'd have to take him out of school, but he's got to come, So you got some lovely seats. We watched Madness. Afterwards, he said, "You want to come backstage?" I'm not really a ligger type, but I did. And there was a bar there, and I had I had my wife and at the time, and Niall with me. I didn't have my daughter at the time, and there was some people sitting on the sofa, and I went to get a glass of wine for my missus, and I said, and she was going, "Oh, look," and I was like, yeah, I can see who it is. Anyway, it was Paul McCartney and Heather Mills, and so the only place, so she went and sat next to him, and my lad went, and as you know, my lad's a professional footballer, and he loved football even then, crazy about it. And he started, and Paul McCartney started talking, oh, son, do you like football and all that? And my son wasn't interested, didn't know who he was, didn't care who he was. If he'd known that she had a wooden leg, he would have been very interested. All he wanted to do was to meet Suggsy, which waiting for the band to come, and that was it. And the next day, sorry, I have to just tell you this, which I never told you this. The next day, I was sitting there reading the Evening Argus. There was a picture of Paul McCartney because he'd bought a house in Sussex.
Yeah.
And I turned, I said to my son, I said, do you remember that guy there? He said, yeah. He said, yeah, he was that old guy with a suit and trainers. And I said, well, that old guy, Niall, I said, he's the most famous, probably the most famous alive musician in the world. And what really impressed him, because it always impresses kids, and I said, he's probably the richest as well. And he went, really? But I never told him that she had a wooden leg. Otherwise, he would have been on his knees asking us to look at it. But yeah,
it's funny, Russ. Yeah, he came to that show and he was in the backstage in the band's dressing room where we had a bit of a party, and he was there for a good hour and a half. And they were both lovely. But my biggest regret, but I've met him a couple of times since, is of course, I love the Beatles, but in the last few years, I've just become obsessed about since the documentary, Twickenham Studios and then into the Apple building.
Abbey Road.
I've just become obsessed about the Beatles and McCartney, and I just wish I had that mindset then, because I just was very blasé about it. It's really strange. Well,
I think we were always like that. We were sort of conditioned to not be starstruck, don't you think, Jake? We met all these people. I mean, on the Jake and I did the Wham tours together. You'd have Liza Minnelli coming back. You'd have Elton John coming with 20 people, and Stevie Nicks, falling over everyone just as you're trying to get the band on stage. But it's like, guys, you just become like that, and it's a shame, really.
I always say, and we've all had this in our own experience. There's many, many celebrities out there, but there's very few stars. People who've got moral and personal star quality. You can count them on one hand sometimes.
Yeah.
We can't tell you who the other ones are, but we can.
It's true. Very true. About the celebrity side of it or the star side of it, it's like we're not supposed to be in awe of. We work. I know people. I don't know if you get it as well, Jake and Russell, but when people with family and friends and they go, oh, do you know them? When you say you're doing a tour with somebody, they go, oh, do you actually meet them, or do you, or do you know them? But it's like, I feel that I play it down almost, but I don't ever have photographs. So even with Bowie, sadly, I never had the bottle to say, can I have a picture with you? Or to be honest with you, I've never done one of them sort of like hand around the shoulder things, because I
don't know whether you guys know an old roadie called Alan Lynch. He was from Liverpool. Alan Lynch, he was like way back in the day, and he was like, Russ, he said, they all piss and shit the same as us. My really bad Liverpool accent, but he used to have a very good outlook on this whole thing, and it's true. It is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get it as well.
I'm for the artists that will pick their own luggage off the belt at the airport, Yeah,
absolutely. Well, when I worked with Chris Rea, I picked him up at Abu Dhabi airport, and in those days there was no security, and all the people knew me, and I used to go to the baggage place, And Chris Rea gets off the plane, and he's got this little bag. It's like a plumber's bag. And I said, well, your bags are taking a bit of time. I better go and talk. He said, no, this is it, mate. That's all I got. For the rest of the tour, I used to lend him clothes. And he was interested. Phil, you probably interviewed him. You were probably around at that time. And all he was interested in was bacon sandwiches and a pint of bitter after the show, which honestly, guys, that is the hardest thing to get in a Muslim country.
Bacon sandwich, of course.
But anyway, there you go. That's another one. But he was pretty down to earth.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from Live Aid, and Steve, you were at the time really working with Nick Kershaw, as you said, and after that, what do you remember? How did things flow for you career-wise?
Yeah, I started working more as a promoter's rep, and I met Russell obviously at the time when I was doing a bit of that for Harvey Goldsmith, who was the biggest promoter. I mean, this is years before SJMs and all those types. I always think Harvey's kind of overlooked a little bit as how groundbreaking he was. You know, I mean, you know, one of the first promoters to start thinking of using Wembley Stadium in the '70s, and that is, you know. Yeah, I was working with him, and then one of the tours that he took on was the first ever Bros tour, and took very similar to the Bay City Rollers, just incredible, crazy fans. You know, we used to do load-ins, and there'd be 200 kids cheering the flight cases coming down the back of the truck. You know,
Yeah.
They after a couple of days, they never had a production manager. They were a bit short-staffed and that. And so they asked me if I would cover that role as well as promoters repping. So, but I ended up working with them and then leaving Harvey's and then becoming a more regular production manager, tour manager. You know, I wasn't really, I was never a great promoters rep, and I never really enjoyed it, to be honest.
It's a hard job, Steve, as you and I know. And
yeah,
it's a hard job.
It is difficult. Yeah, it's I don't know why it's difficult. I think there's that element where you spend all day there appeasing everybody on both sides, the venue, the artists, the production, the tour managers, and then you get the promoter turn up with his, you know, flashy suit at 8 o'clock in the evening, takes all the credit. You know, it's
all the credit and all the money.
But then you got to climb into your car at 11 o'clock if the production or tour manager for the act you're working with will let you go, and you've got to drive another 6 hours from Leicester down to Plymouth, and you've got to be there at 8, 9 in the morning when the first truck shows up. You know, there was a period I went through where I had a sleeping bag in the back of the car when I was doing that job.
I actually, that's where we met, Steve. When you were working for Harvey, and we worked on that rock and roll revival tour.
Yeah,
and I just quickly tell you, I just thought of the one thing. It ended at the Albert Hall, and we were doing it in the round, and we had no budget, and we needed a revolving stage. And you or someone said, "Well, what about George Benson? He's got one." So he got in touch with George Benson's lot. We could afford the stage, but we couldn't afford the motor. So we had 10 crew on their backs.
Miracles crew.
After every song, it was on the radio. It was like, guys, just turn it round now, and go, you know, and all that stuff. I mean, really, I don't know, it was a full house, but they never knew, and we got away with it. Another bluff.
I do remember that. That was a funny old tour, wasn't it? Ricky Nelson, I think it was about a month before he got killed.
All dead. All of them gone. All of them gone. I remember Bo Diddley nearly killing me because I thought, oh, I'll get his guitar out. He had this homemade guitar, and I'll get his guitar out and give it a tune. You know, he'll be happy if I do that. The guy nearly killed me. Don't ever touch my guitar.
Square one, the famous square one.
Yeah. Big mistake. Jake, tell us, back in the day, I mean, and looking back, I mean, you've had to do a lot of. Tell us a little bit about, you know, having to massage the artist's ego, you know, just for the common good of the tour. It's difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes you have to. I mean, my way of doing it was always, I'd just be very honest with them, you know, like if they said, "Oh, I just tripped over that," I'd say, "Look where you're going, you wanker," you know. And they'd always do a double take, but you know what I mean. But there is a certain amount of diplomacy. Massaging the ego, you get some really crazy people, some crazy requirements. You know,
it takes me back to my first Wham show was, and you guys have done this gig as well, the infamous Whitley Bay ice rink, and
we used to have to go outside to get warm.
Yeah,
so cold. Everyone was sick.
Yeah, no, I in fact, bless George, he allowed me. It's my first tour with them, and Simon Napier Bell and Jazz Summers wanted it done right because they knew George was on his way to his own stellar career. So I actually went and advanced those shows, like 3 a day in the UK, just to double check everything. The first place I went was Whitley Bay. I could not get rid of that cold before they start the tour, you know. But I do recall it was, you know, usual hurried thing, merchandising arriving at 7:30 sort of thing, and. when the show was over, it's the first show that everybody turns up. They all want to be there, the agent, the lot. And off they went back into the dressing room. Ronnie Franklin was just standing outside. I was close by. The door opened just a touch. And George, who I didn't really know that well at that point, because I'd come on at short notice, beckoned me into the dressing room. And he says, now I'm going to ask you, what do you think of the show? And I said, well, to be honest, George, I thought it was a bit rough at the edges. He said, I'm glad to hear that. He says, you'll do, It's just that sometimes there's a time where you've got to pick your artist to do this with, because some of them can't take it. But there's a time when you've just got to tell it like it is.
Yeah.
Scenario of the Emperor's Clothes, isn't it, really, I suppose? Everyone say, yeah, it's great, George, and you say it's rough around the edges. Ice rinks. Russell, in Dubai. A couple of ice rinks there were used a lot for shows. You must have done a few, the Al Nasser or the one at the Hyatt Regency.
UB40, the Gang, Cliff Richard, tons of them. Not Maxi Peace, that was on the beach. Loads of them.
Whitley Bay was horrendous. I tell you, it's very common as well in Europe. When I was working with, I'm going to name drop here, Christa Berg. I was doing a lot of tours with him, and he was huge. I don't know if anyone's aware how big Christa Berg was in Europe and Germany in general. I mean, Jake mentioned the Deutschland Halle. He used to do about 3 nights there. I mean, the guy was printing money in those days. So it just, I remember having to, there was always snow on the roof in the winter, so you couldn't get half the rigging in the roof because there was tons and tons of snow on, and working freezing cold temperatures on ice rinks, pushing flight cases. Some ice rinks weren't covered or partially covered. Oh, horrible days. But Whitley Bay is probably the worst ice rink I've ever had to work in.
The Whitley Bay that I remember was the cold, obviously, but the thing that hit me when this was with Wham with Jake, when the boys came on stage, I had never worked with a teeny band before, teeny bop band, if you like.
Yeah, I've done loads.
What hit me immediately was my eardrums were rattling with the screaming. I'd never experienced that before. You were probably got used to it, but that I just remember thinking, shit, this is something else, like thousands of kids just screaming,
Yeah.
And we used to have they used to pass out, didn't they, Jake? We used to have kids hospital out there.
Oh God, yeah.
And then they would pretend to pass out so they could be passed over the barrier to them.
Oh, right, yeah.
And halfway over the barrier, and they could just put one foot in the top of the barrier and leap onto the stage. That was a favourite one as well.
I used to pretend to pass out so I could go home, but no one bought it.
But I remember Whitley Bay, the riggers being covered in bird shit, because every time they sort of started to rig over the beams there, it was just the amount of crap that would come out of that roof. It was horrendous.
They loved it. Riggers, no sympathy for those mad guys.
But remember, this was the days before most arenas. You maybe had Wembley, you had the NEC. So a venue where you could pack 4,500 people onto the floor was a good little money maker. And that's where Whitley Bay came into its own.
Yeah, and it was years before the very average arena in Newcastle. They've kind of gone. They've slightly made it slightly better than Whitley Bay, but only slightly.
Yeah,
yeah.
But great fans. Let's be honest, Newcastle fans.
Yeah. Oh, I love them.
So, guys, just changing the subject a little bit. Do you still get? I mean, Jake's. I have to tell you, he's on his, like I said, he's on his doing his gap year in his later life now on a train journey around Europe at the moment. But do you get a sense, because I know, Steve, you're now into management, but do you get this sort of yearning to, after a while of you sitting at home, pack the case and go somewhere? Because that's basically all we did for so long.
To be honest, Russell, not anymore for me. The longer I'm away from it, the longer, I wonder how I managed it. Probably like Steve as well. I know most itineraries are now online with Master Tour, etc. But, I've still got 2 shelves filled with these standard A5 comb-bound itineraries. and I run my thumb along them and I think it could not have been me. But, you know, that's a facet, I think, of getting older. Your energy level does drop. But, you know, it took an awful lot of energy and a lot of application in a business where somebody once said to me, most artists never remember the 99 things you did right, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, and we had no personal time, as you know, Russell. There's no time of your own.
No.
You should really be calling home, but the artist is knocking on your door so you can get a pass for his girlfriend's friend, etc. And days and weeks and months fly by. And I just think, especially where my children, because one of them's in Australia now, one of them's in Vietnam, it gives me time to go and see them. You know, yes, we got a great living out of it, but boy, it's full on.
You earned it. You earned every buck. What about you, Steve?
Oh, I couldn't handle it no more, Russell. I'm seriously, I'm so over it. If I never have to see a back lounge of a tour bus again in my life, I'll be happy. I don't want to sit with a load of moaning roadies, because they're worse than the band. Let's be honest. I mean, God, they moan about everything, and so that's what kind of in the end. You know, I remember sort of doing, at the time I was doing a lot more production management than tour managing, but I ended up saying, right, I'm going to just concentrate on tour management now, because I just got so fed up with people whinging and complaining about everything. And I thought the band are probably a little bit easier to deal with, and the artists as well. So no, I spent half my married life on the road. I only saw my kids half of my adult life. I just can't handle it no more.
Yeah, me too. Mind you, I did do a lot more promoter repping, and but that still also kept me away. But then obviously I moved to the Middle East and set up my own scenic company. So we just built
quite a groundbreaker on that, wasn't you, Russ? I remember when you first told me you were going there, I was like, wow, because at the time it was very almost unheard of, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I went there as a promoter's rep, and the idea was with the promoter was that I was going to do the Middle East and Asia, but Jackson had gone round before in Asia and bankrupted all the promoters. So the sort of we were working with, they had no money. So in the end, they were committed to me already. So they just said, well, okay, we do a couple of shows between September and May. We do a couple of shows a month, and I did some. I mean, I did Meatloaf, $13,000 a night. You know, even in those days that was cheap. You know, because record companies supported it. Couldn't do it now. Did Meatloaf, UB40. You know, where I had the tour accountant Jake would relate to this, crying. You know, where strangely £100,000 had gone somewhere on some stuff that you couldn't really write in the accounts and stuff like that. Maybe you can't put that in the podcast, but. Anyway, things like that, you know, we did some amazing bands, and we were
the likes of Duran Duran and Tom Jones in the car park, and
lots of these artists.
What was that, Jackson? Obviously, was that the one the Marcel Avram kind of connection Jackson tour that you did?
No, I don't know. I think an old
strange bloke who used to own Wharfdale buses. What was his name? And he was Berryhurst, wasn't he, originally, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. I know that he was involved a lot in that Jackson, that whole world tour with Jackson.
Yeah.
But I think what happened there, Russ, is that they offer him a guaranteed amount of money up front, and then he started getting ill and cancelling shows, and then he had to honor the amount of shows that he agreed. So yeah, it was.
An ex-colleague of Jake and I's worked on Jackson in the end, who's no longer with us, bless him. Benny Collins.
Oh yeah,
Jake.
Yeah.
Benny Collins. You remember Benny Collins? He's all right there. Big guy. He always have a spirit. Yeah. He was quite a character.
But in my Steve, for some input as well on this, but you know, in this side of the pond, the tour manager pretty much calls the shots and runs the roost. In America, my experience has been that the production manager, you know, is the head honcho. And a lot of time, the tour manager obviously is a great administrator, but he's not over involved in the serious decision making. The production manager's carrying that can, and that's how I sort of remember Benny Collins as well.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
I still am traumatized that he didn't let me play in the game in China.
The football game.
Yeah, when you'd had your Hearts kit couriered over, you were ready.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, Benny, when's this game? I want to play. And he said, it's already happened. I said,
Yeah.
but I want to play it. And he said, no, you get injured. I said, well, I'm not like a striker. You know, I'm not like, we're not running a proper football team here. It's just a kickabout.
Yeah.
Oh no, you wouldn't let me in it. So
I came across Benny several years later. I was looking after the opening act on the Michael Jackson Dangerous tour. This girl called Rosala. You may remember she had one major hit, Everyone is Free, or Everybody's Free. Lovely girl from Zimbabwe. But, you know, the record company wanted it done properly. So Sony paid me real well just to go and look after it. But so I had a ringside seat to the whole thing. And on the second show at Wembley, Michael, for some reason, would not leave the hotel, and they pulled the show once the audience was in the stadium. So Benny Collins said, hang on, I'll handle this. Somebody's got to tell these poor people it's not going to happen. So he steps up downstage centre to the microphone, and 72,000 people just went, what? And Barry Clayman had to go back out there and tell the kids. And that was horrendous because all these parents started making a beeline for Wembley to pick up their children, and other people were trying to leave. What a nightmare.
Oh, God, yeah. Cool, you don't think it here. The parents come in to pick kids up.
Yeah.
Before we move on, or, you know, we're cracking on here, I did want to talk to you about, you know, backstage gate crashers, liggers as we call them, you know, bands, friends, and interaction. And I'll just share one thing with you which might trigger. Remember, we used to do these university tours, you know, and I was working with a band called Gene Loves Jezebel. I was a tour manager, and like you, Jake, I think I learnt this from you. Always look out for the band, because the band, you know, they don't realize that every time you give a big guest list, it's coming out of your percentage. You know, it's not a good thing. And I always used to fight for that, and the band were moaning to me that they weren't making any money. And I said, well, your guest list, they had this sort of cult following. They used to put all the followers on the guest list at every show around these university, you know, campuses. So they said, well, typical band thing, this. They said, yes, go on, just take them off the guest list, which I did. And of course, before the show, the whole of the hall, maybe 1,000 people, were chanting, "Russell is a wanker," because when they were asking the band why did we have to pay to get in, they said, "Oh, well, that's Russell, our tour manager's fault," even though they'd asked me to do it. You know, is there anything, you know, that you remember? Because I know, Jake, you were very strong on that. You know,
Jake's always been very strong on that.
The way I get round it to these artists, you know, the second time I worked with Westlife, and poor Steve has had that experience as well in his stellar career. But, you know, they were complaining about trying to get more money. And I said, listen, if we are sold out and you've got 30 tickets waiting, held for you, for your guest list at the venue, okay? If you let these tickets go, we can sell them, not a problem. If you don't, and you let people on the guest list that you don't know, then believe it or not, you're actually paying people to come to your show, you know? And it should be the other way around. They should be paying to get into your show, but you are allowing them to come to your show and take money out of your pocket. And that makes them sit down and think a bit, you know?
Yeah.
One of the great, it's really strange to say this, but during the pandemic, I was tour managing Madness, and we were doing our usual Christmas arena tour, and nearly every tour had been cancelled, postponed, or, you know, we were out on the road with a few other bands. But one of the great things about that tour, and the only good thing about that tour, was nobody was allowed backstage. Now, for a Madness show, that's unbelievable, because their rider would be, and again, something else that the band are paying for, which some bands are quite fathom.
They don't get it, do they?
You don't get it. The fact that you can have whatever you want, especially American artists. I want champagne, caviar, prawns, and God. Yeah, you can have whatever you want. You're paying for it.
It's okay. It's a show cost.
Yeah, it's a show
until
cost.
we get into profit, and then it's yours, mate.
But yeah, the Madness, we always used to have an abundance of rider and would set up like family and friends rooms full of like huge amounts of alcohol. But the great thing about the pandemic was nobody at all was allowed backstage apart from the people on the tour. And we did about 15 shows, and it was like, there was tumbleweed backstage. But that was very strange. But it was also wonderful just to finish a show without having a lot of tossers backstage.
And they made a lot of money, more money.
I must say, it's very insightful hearing about the rider situation, the guest list costings going to the band, because as a non-promoter, one assumed that, okay, it was up to the promoter to pass that over and not really charge the band. So yeah, it's a good way of telling them you're losing the money because you're paying for both aspects. Yeah.
Some of the riders are crazy. Some of the riders are ridiculous.
I was going to say, Steve, maybe you could start with us. Just very, very quickly, each person just mention one of the craziest riders that they've ever come across. Just very briefly. Because there are some bizarre ones.
I mean, predominantly, I can't think of anything, but invariably, it was always predominantly the American artists. The American artists. And the waste, like with anything in America, even the restaurants, and you go to Carnegie Deli and people they give you the size of a sandwich that and you leave half of it and they throw it in the trash. So it's just a waste, and also the catering, it's all that the catering is so over the top. The 3-course meals that could feed an army, and that's what I find, and the riders on the buses as well.
Yeah. No wonder these American crews can't get up in the morning, Steve, with a rider that's put on the bus the night before.
We used to have a curly cheese and pickle sandwich, didn't we? We'd be over the moon about that at 1 o'clock in the morning, but they'd have pizzas and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and oh my God, it's like you said, I don't know how they got in their bunks half the time.
How many slim, experienced American production managers do you know?
What?
How many slim, experienced American production managers do you know?
None is the answer. None.
Yeah.
What about you, Jake? Anything that springs to mind?
I can't recall the artist, maybe when I was being a promoter's rep, but they wanted Baskin Robbins ice cream. And at the time, Baskin Robbins had only come into the UK, say the year before, in certain isolated areas to test the market. And we sent the runner from the NEC to Nottingham to pick up this ice cream. And then, of course, by the time it got back, it was like a milkshake. I had to go back at the freezer. But that was certainly an American artist. Or these artists, they fly into Birmingham and airport and they say, send the runner to get me. I say, you can walk here in 10 minutes to the NEC. No, send the runner, man. Send the runner, Excessive.
Just obviously the rider stories are crazy. We had Phil and I experienced one thing with a certain 80s pop band who came to Dubai, and it was categorically stated in the rider that there should be no brown carpets anywhere in any sight of the keyboard player. That was in their rider, and I shared that with Steve and with Phil. And Phil at that time had the Midday Special, the biggest radio show in Dubai, and he dedicated to this certain artist a track by the Inspiral Carpets. So that was our little.
There was another one. I think you were involved with the opening of the major golf club in Dubai Creek Golf Club, with a big orchestra and also Shirley Bassey. And I'd be involved as a MC for a lot of these shows, especially with Russell. And I was at Backstage, of course, went to the side of where she was coming on, and there was paint smell everywhere. And she didn't like the colour of the dressing room, didn't she? And at the very last moment, before she arrived, you had to change the colour.
Yeah, what happened was we had to build a dressing room for Shirley, a dressing room for the band, and a dressing room, like a hangout place for the crew and a production office. And that was on the 18th green of a new golf course. There was no water supply, no electrical supply, nothing. And Phil Bowdry, who you both know, was looking after Shirley at the time, and he was like, "Oh no, Russ, can you build us this and this and that?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, we can do it." But we're really running out of time. And by the time he sent me exactly what he wanted to do, and showers as well in them all. And then the day before they came in for the rehearsals before the event, Phil called me from London. He said, I forgot to tell you, I need a place for the conductor." I said, "Yeah, I'll find him a place in the concert." He said, "No, you have to build another room, like a," and I said, but I can't do, shower." He said, "No, you have to do shower." I was like, "Oh." Anyway, we did it. We worked night and day, and we did it. And then Phil walked in the next day, and he walked into Shirley's room, and he was going, "Oh, this is amazing, Russ. You've done an amazing job. Great credit to you," and all that. He said, but then he went, "Bloody hell," he said, "smells of paint." I said, "Steve, it was only painted 2 hours ago because it was only built yesterday." And like, "Oh, Shirley won't be able to do that." La, 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 la. He said, "Chop up some onions." And that's when I first heard about the onion thing, and he put some onions in a plate and it'll absorb all the thing. But yeah, that was crazy.
But don't forget the famous Shirley Bassey was renowned for her riders and her dressing rooms. We have to all record that the Manchester Apollo, the dressing room upstairs, or the Star Room, was originally for Shirley. It was all redecorated and everything. And she's the one who insisted that she, in her rider, she has an insistence that the toilet seat is always white. So she, but that room at the Apollo was redecorated, and for a couple of nights of shows that she did in the early 80s, I think. And I think it's still the same decor now. But I haven't been back to Manchester Apollo for a few.
What a performer, though. What a performer.
Oh, amazing. Absolutely.
Goldfinger, and like, wow, amazing.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I remember I did Pavarotti in Hyde Park, and in that rain when all the royal family and the PM and all the cabinet were getting soaked like rats in front of the stage because they all put their umbrellas up, and all the hoi polloi behind started telling them to put the umbrellas down. So even Diana's sitting there with a plastic bag over.
Yeah.
And he couldn't do stairs. I mean, it's a bit like Mariah Carey, but it's Pavarotti this time. He would not do stairs, so we had to get a scissor lift to bring him up and down from the stage. And I remember Diana and Charles were waiting for him to come off the stage, and she would look like a drowned rat, to be honest with you. Still beautiful. And I remember coming down in the scissor lift with him behind this curtain, and it seemed to take an eternity. Wow. Scissor lifts. And then all of a sudden we opened this curtain, and I walked him through to meet Diana and Charles and that. And they had no idea that 2 seconds earlier he'd been like coming down at sort of like for about a minute in the scissor lift,
Well, I mean, those are difficult things to conjure up, these riders and people's specific needs. But also, it doesn't help sometimes when you have a bit of a troublesome artist. And we haven't touched on this, and I haven't touched on this for a very good reason, because I think enough's been said about our dear friend Ozzy. But I would like just each of you to maybe, without putting yourself in trouble, talking about an artist that you think you work with. I mean, Jake, there is one story which I found quite funny, and it's written about, it's in the book, about the Alamo, and I think you were there with Ozzy, weren't you, for the Alamo?
That was in San Antonio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I didn't walk out with them to walk along to the Alamo. I was busy just trying to get the gig together. I think he and Sharon had possibly had a minor tiff, and off he stormed. And basically, in those days, that's before he and Sharon were married. So, they were just going out together, really. And he'd come out of a long relationship. He by his own admission, was dependent on a lot of drugs at the time. I'm not even sure he knew where he was. He just wandered along the street. Our hotel wasn't far from the Alamo, and needed to pee, and that was it. So they arrested him, but we managed to convince the authorities that there'd be a bigger riot if he didn't play than, you know, if he did. But after the show, the band bus, like the band bus and Ozzy's bus, they were escorted out of the state, you know, into Alabama.
I think
the buses weren't allowed to stop.
I think it's fair to say that man needed a lot of management on the road. Gave you a few headaches, I would imagine. Steve, what about you, mate? You seem to have had a bit of a light ride. Maybe I'm doing you a disservice there.
I worked with about 3 artists who, oh my God, I'm going to name names, I don't care. Nigel Kennedy,
Really?
the Mockney fiddler.
Yeah.
Was managed at the time by someone who Jake will know extremely well, Jazz Summers.
Oh God, yeah.
Jazz is a legend, or was a legend, bless his heart. And he asked me to look after Nigel Kennedy, and he was painful. He was painful. He's wanted the biggest suite in the best hotel in every city. Then insisted on about 3 or 4 huge industrial humidifiers going into the suite to keep his violin to a certain humidity. And then he kind of want to be one of the lads and go and jam with the local band in the clubs, but he couldn't just go along and play a little bit of fiddle. He'd sort of insist on bringing like a pedal board, you know, and 15 pedals to play his violin through. So I remember doing a show with him at the Barbican and leaving that night. You know, you must have been there yourself. I remember walking out to the stage door, putting him in the car, and literally, fuck off. I know I'm out of here, you know. And I remember the relief of just going home that night, thinking I've never have to work with that little prick again.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And then
I mean, I've had
a couple of managers like that as well. Work. Some of them, you know what I find? Invariably, the artist is wonderful, but they have a prick of a manager. Or
it's getting to the artist, you know.
I would verify that. I'll agree with that fully. One time with Meatloaf, you probably don't know him, and he'll never listen to this podcast. Michael Jeans was his production manager. We're touring with Meat, as they call him, Meat. And he was fine. Meatloaf was fine. He was great. He was a geezer, you know. But every single hotel we went into, he made everybody, the crew, the band, sit in the hotel lobby and wait for him to go and check all the beds. Not only for me, but the beds for everyone. It was like, you know, it was just some trip he was on. You know, it was a nightmare. And that wasn't one of my most pleasurable. I agree with you, Steve. Sometimes people, you know, it goes to their head a bit, you know.
Yeah,
but a lot of the time you know, it's like Steve said. You know, like I got a call a few years ago. Somebody told me about the artist was losing a bit of money, so I dropped on tour. I dropped a note to the artist management and said, "Listen, if you want to give me a call," I said, "I will save you 10 grand on your next tour in one call, and I won't even charge it." Now, if I'd had Lewis, it was Lewis Capaldi, I don't mind saying so. If I'd had Lewis sat in front of me and said, "Lewis, I know how to save you 10 grand over the next tour, possibly more," he would be all ears. But the management can't really go to Lewis, because Lewis is going to say, "Well, why didn't you tell me this before? Why don't you know this?" And the problem that aging tour managers have is that young management think they're going to have their job away.
Yeah.
At times, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
You must have experienced that, Steve. I mean, well, look at.
I get really pissed off actually with some of this kind of real chummy relationship between the agent and management. I just think it's too chummy at times. I think they need to keep being a bit more forceful and a bit strong with some of their agents. You know, I think and I just find some artists don't need agents. I mean,
Not at all.
I
Not in,
just
not in this country, Steve. If you're successful, you
Go on,
don't.
Jake.
I mean,
It's soapbox.
a band
Jake's
who
got
I
it.
worked with for many years, who and I know for a fact the agent just picks up the phone to the promoter and says, "I need a 2-week tour every 2 years," and that's their job done, and £200,000 in their back pocket.
Money
it's
for all
what
drop.
an agent to do that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are a few other things. Just briefly, I forgot to say to you, Jake. You might
Not the
not remember.
10-tonner story, is it?
Well, that will come in it as well. But do you remember the first? I remember the first time I came. I set eyes on you, and it might not be. I probably isn't when you think, but the first time I set eyes on you, Jake, was I was called to the Hammersmith Odeon. It was the band Japan's last gig in England. And there was a support band called Sandy and the Sunsets, who they'd been supporting you around England, if you remember. And I was going to take that band and be the tour manager. They were going to go back around England, and because they'd had some sort of success as a support band. So I was there ready to watch them, but I stayed and I watched Japan because I actually quite like that band as well. And the first time I laid eyes on you, you were running around trying to get all the gear to Heathrow to ship, funnily enough, to the Philippines.
Japan.
No.
Oh, the Philippines. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that clearly. And you were on a bit of a schedule. Yeah, and I remember that very clearly. I've obviously just said about when I first met Steve, but the 10-tonner story, just very quickly. And Steve, I don't know how much you work with Jake, but Jake and Phil, you probably don't know this as well. Jake, when he tours as the tour manager or tour accountant, he's always immaculate. He wears a suit, he wears a tie, he always looks the dog's bollocks, doesn't he, Steve?
He does, indeed.
Yeah, he's really well.
I toned it down a bit for the
He's
tour
dressed down
accountant.
for the railway tour.
Yeah. For the railway tour, he's like this. But anyway, so Jake's. I forgot what I was going to say. Now we'll have to edit that out.
No worries.
Russell, see, when you're thinking of that, could I just interject, because this will interest Steve as well? I've got a pretty good story about that very last show at Hammersmith Odeon.
Oh,
it was the last show the band were going to play in the UK. They were going off, as you say, to the Philippines. Then they went to Japan, and then the band were disbanding after Japan because David Sylvian did not want to be over commercial. He wanted to do his own thing and run off with Robert Fripp, etc. So there was a lot, as you recall, a lot of excitement around that last show, and everybody wanted to be there, and it was just getting manic in that lane at the back of the Odeon where the backstage area is. Now, the guy on the door was the infamous Ron the Dog, who had the Alsatian when he worked for Shosek. Now, Jazz Summers came out to me and said, listen, if one more person comes into this backstage area, pass or not, and distracts this band, we're never going to go on time. And I promised David Sylvian for his last show in the UK, we will go on time. So I went to back door and I said, right, Ron, this is it. Nobody comes in this back door. Doesn't matter. All the crew are all in. We're getting ready to go. Do not let anybody else in this back door before the band go on stage. All right, Jake. All right, that should be fine. No problem. So gig goes ahead. Great night, etc., etc. It's all calming down a little bit, and I go back out to Ron and I said, listen, sorry I had to sort of draw a hard line there. He said, no, mate, I understand. You've got to do your job. I said, so, was there any sort of latecomers? He says, well, there was this geezer. It turns up in this big flash Rolls Royce, he said, and he had like his hair was sticking up a bit. And I said, sorry, mate, no one's coming in here. No one's coming in here at all, mate. I'm under strict instruction. No one comes in. And the guy, I said, did you have any indication who the guy was of that? And Ryan said, well, he said his name was Bowie or David Bowie. So I just told him, fuck off, mate. Nobody's coming in.
Brilliant. Oh, dear.
So David Bowie got turned away from Japan's last show.
Oh my God.
And Steve,
Anyway,
how is it working with David Bowie? Bowie.
amazing, incredible. It's probably the highlight of my career.
Yeah.
I was on a bit of a roll as a production manager again, and I get the feeling that David was very keen to get a few Brits involved. It was predominantly an American band and a few American crew, but I think he was very keen to have some Brits around. So I was doing Peter Gabriel. I was doing an incredible, amazing production with Peter Gabriel, and I think I kind of impressed the whoever it was, the promoters in those days, Live Nation or whatever, whoever it was. And I got a call from Bill Zisblatt to would I be interested? And yeah, only slightly, but I'd have to fly out to New York to meet David at the studio, which I did. And I got on really well with him. I sat in with rehearsals, and we had a meeting, and he kind of sketched on a pad how he kind of the concept of the show he wanted. And I'd always, obviously, I was a huge Bowie fan, you know, and all my girlfriends and friends in those early 70s had him on posters on the wall. So for me, it was a dream come true. But and it was, but I nearly lost the job almost immediately. We was doing production rehearsals at Forêt Nationale, and there was a bit of a cock up. He wanted a thrust between the stage and the and the barrier, and it wasn't anywhere near as big as he was expecting. And he really tore it. I mean, I sat down in a meeting room in the catering room, and he caught me off guard. I thought he was just wanted to have a chat about the show, but my God, he laid into me about this thrust. And there was people around on the table who were all ducking, who are more responsible for it than me. And of course, I didn't want to throw anyone under the bus. I'm not,
Yeah.
but, and I honestly thought I was going to be sacked before the first show. And I think it was 50-50 for a little while. But it was the only crosswords we ever had in about 18 months. And Alan Edwards saved my job. I think Alan Edwards was he wasn't the manager. Alan sometimes got mistaken as Bowie's manager, but one thing that Bowie always emphasized is that I don't have management. I have business management, Bill Zisblatt, but I do not have management. In fact, we put a sign on the door, Backstage, Bowie management, and he said, Steve, do me a favor, take that down. I don't have management. Alan Edwards spoke up for me and saved my job, and I had an amazing 18 months with him before there was a bit of a natural break in the tour, and I got asked to go back to do Peter Gabriel because it was such a really intense production with Peter Gabriel. They wasn't keen to have anyone else do the tour. I mean, I'm not bigging myself up, but it's just natural, you know, to keep the same team. So I ended up taking my Bowie team back to Gabriel and gave the gig to the wonderful, amazing Bill Leibody.
So Peter Gabriel, another artist of mine, which I really admire along with Bowie. Peter Gabriel, tell us about working with him.
Oh, a genius, absolute genius. But had Circus Soleil people design the show, and it was crazy. It was crazy. If you had it in Vegas or in a theater over a residency, yeah, great. But to actually take it every night and put it up and take it down. But yeah, he was unbelievable. It was an in the round show. I think it was called Growing Up, where I don't know if you've seen it when he gets into the Zorb and goes around the stage of the Zorb and bounces. If you ever get a chance, it's on, it's on YouTube. We filmed the show Fila Forum in Milan. That was the best production I've ever been involved with. That was incredible.
We've covered so many different areas, but one which I'm sort of interested in is the way things have evolved from both perspectives over your several decades of being in the business, how things have changed. I mean, Jake, you said about not being able to communicate with family because you were so busy. I suppose you were going around with bags of coins to make a call home or whatever. These days, so easy to communicate. But what were the biggest challenges in the early days, and how has things evolved? And Steve, from a production side, I mean, elaborate shows, things must be a lot easier now with digital aspects of lighting and controlling of the various elements. So, Jake, from your side, first of all, what's been the biggest changes in touring? Is it easier now?
Eh, it's more expensive now, that's for sure. I think one of the biggest changes since the early days is, in my opinion, the over reliance on screens on stage and at the side of the stage. I was lucky a few months ago. I was over in the States and I went to see a show at the Sphere in Las Vegas. And it was, although it was technically incredible, it was kind of saddening for me because think of you're inside like a huge football. The whole inside of that surface is a video wall. So when they show, there was a guy on a country artist I'd hardly heard of called Kenny Chesney, but he managed to fill 2 nights at 16,000. But when the show starts, it's almost like you're in a fish tank. You know, you're surrounded by a video wall. There's no sound system. You can't see the sound system. It's designed into the structure of the building. And everybody is looking over their head at what's happening, and nobody is looking at the stage. Absolutely. And I just think it's kind of sad when it's got to that stage, you know?
Yeah.
Great point.
No focal point, as you say, with looking around. But on a personal level, if you're on tour these days, is it a better lifestyle?
Well, better standard of travel, you know, sophisticated tour buses. You know, you fall onto the bus, you know, at 1 o'clock in the morning after you're loaded out and the rigging truck's packed, and then somebody drives you right to the door of the next venue you're doing for 7 o'clock in the morning. So, and, you know, we have professional caterers. I mean, when I first did Madison Square Gardens with Jethro Tull in 75, they sent one of the stagehands across 33rd Street to go get two buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken. There was no rider, you know. I think that's why Ian ended up owning an island off of Scotland. But you know, they were my first biggest band, and it was an incredible experience, and I've got a lot to thank them for. But you know, huge productions nowadays. It's almost like they're trying to outdo each other at times.
Competitive element. And Steve, from your side of things, biggest changes over the last 40, 50 years?
You know what? I still yearn for the days. I know we all look back in with rose tinted glasses, but I mean, I was a huge like Dr. Feelgood fan, and going to seeing just a 4-piece band on the stage at Hammersmith Apollo with just a very average lighting rig. Obviously no screens, no projection even in those days, you know. And for bands like Thin Lizzy at Lewis Shimodian, and I mean, I yearn for those days. And I agree with Jake. Although I've been involved in some huge LED productions, you know, and you know, even like bands like Madness have become so reliant now on content and video screens. I agree. I just can't stand seeing the audience constantly looking left and right and forgetting there's a band performing on stage. But yeah, I agree. There's a lot more there's a lot more charter jets now these days. That seems to, I wouldn't say it's become affordable, but I think there's so much competition out there with charter companies. You can get a decent deal if you're of a decent standard of a band. That takes so much pressure off you as a tour manager. I think one of the most stressful things about tour managing, and that's one of the reasons why I can't do it no more, is that check-in situation at airports. And you know, especially if you're on a low budget and you've got people in coach and economy, you know, not everyone's in business class.
Yeah.
But to put a band on a private plane and to just have the cars meet you on the airside on the tarmac, oh my God, that's a different
world.
They're very expensive, but they're a tour manager's dream, Steve, because your private plane always waits for you, right?
Yeah.
You actually dumped me in. I think it was somewhere like I don't know where it was. Jake, do you remember that, where you left some of the crew behind in America? It was Houston or somewhere to the next leg on a Wham tour in America. And there was me and a few others that were left, and we had to get the next plane. I don't know how that happened. Back in the day, it was not as sophisticated either, flying, you know, boarding passes and all the shit that goes on. I seem to remember that the plane was full or over, but we were meant to get on this plane, but we didn't. We couldn't. They closed the door and we were standing there waiting. We had to get on it. They said, "Oh, we'll get you on the next plane." I can't remember.
I mean, airlines knowingly overbook between 8 and 10% just on the hope that certain people are not going to show up. You know, they've been at it for years.
Yeah.
But they don't usually let you in.
I just I think as I've got older, I don't know if you all find it, but as you get older, do you find that your anxiety levels are so much greater than when they was when you were younger? And I remember I do find I get very, very stressed out on movement days, you know, especially with flying and that. It's I find, especially with, and that's one thing that has changed. Years ago, as we all know, we could all swap boarding passes. You didn't really, there was hardly any security checks. Now you've got to get there at least about 3 hours before the flight. It's horrendous. Honestly,
I think, Steve, you're from an environment where you're in control in your professional life in terms of the shows and everything else. You get to an airport check-in, it's totally out of one's control. One's got no control whatsoever. So you go from a controlled environment, which you're controlling, to one where you have no say whatsoever. Yeah,
that's really a good point, actually, Phil, because we are all slightly control freaks and that, and we're so used to being in control, and that's one of the few times when you're not. And I had a situation during the COVID pandemic again where I had a musician in the band who refused to conform to the pandemic. He didn't believe in it, and he said to me, "Look, I'll get on the flight as long as they won't make me wear a face mask." And I remember at that time it was the law, it was the rules. Lufthansa, I remember getting all the band on the plane, and he walked on without his face mask, and of course they wouldn't let him on. And he looked at me and went, I told you," and I went, "Listen," and I'm the tour manager of this little band. I've got no input about Lufthansa and the German government, you know. Get real, for Christ's sake, you know. Anyway.
Well, chaps, this has been a fascinating insight from into your careers and who you've worked with. I know Russ got a couple of things to finish off with, but for me, what's been perhaps, both of you, your proudest moments or greatest achievements during your careers?
For me, it would obviously have to be the 8 years I spent with George Michael. You know, consummate professional. You know, let you get on with it. A nice guy, great musician. No expense spared for musicians and the way he wanted it, and it was very enjoyable.
As a sign of his respect for you as a professional person.
George was very clever. George surrounded himself with people who he could translate what he wanted, and he knew. You know, Elton John once said something that struck me. And it was during the era of Miley Cyrus when she was spinning out of control. And Elton John said, "The day that you surround yourself with people that do not question what you do is the day you send yourself to a bad place." And there's an element of truth in that. But you've got, as both Russell and Steve know, you've just got to pick your time with artists, you know? You've got to tell them what they don't want to hear, and then they think it was their idea.
I've always found Elton very good at, I just find him, he's such a drama queen. Though. I mean, I've seen him throwing like the rider up, all the sushi up against the wall, stamping his feet, getting back in his car 5 minutes before the show and saying, "Take me back to the airport. I'm not fucking playing this." And literally like Keith Bradley and people like that. Honestly, I mean, it's funny. Elton's very good at. But he's, oh my God, he had the demons, that guy, at times. He really did on the road. He must have been extremely.
I mean, Zev Isaacs in Israel, Steve told me a story where Elton flew in to do 2 shows. Somebody said the wrong thing to him at the press conference. He leapt over the back of the couch, got a hold of Keith Bradley, they went back to the airport and flew back to London. And Zev had to, this is 2 days ahead of time, the first show, Zev had to plead with them to fly back, which thankfully he did a day later.
Yeah.
But the public never see that.
I know Phil's trying to wind up here a bit because we go on forever these things, but I must just remind you of which is one of I think, the funniest things that I was ever involved with, which was after the Wham, the final, which we did together, Jake. If you remember, Elton took over the whole of the backstage. George and Andrew were in one of your cost-saving porter cabins, quite rightly. And Elton brought 2 Winnebagos. He brought a swimming pool, and everything. But he gave the boys a gift of a Reliant Robin. And this Reliant Robin, I don't know if you remember, Jake, it had fur inside, furry dashboard, furry dice, and it had a visor on the front, George for Andrew. Anyway, we bumped out the gig and, loaded out everything. I was back in Ixworth House in the office like a week or 2 weeks later, downing the gig, and I get a call from Brent Council. Is that the Wham office? I said, yeah, it is. And he said, we have a Reliant Robin here. You need to come and collect it. I said, oh, throw it away, No, it's not our policy. You have to collect it. Yeah. So anyway, we drew lots, and there were 3 people that we drew lots with in the office. And one guy, Robert Baldwin, who was a friend of mine, who was just really a runner, he refused to do it. He lost, and he refused to do it. He said, you can sack me, you can do whatever. I am not driving a Reliant Robin, because he was a petrol head. So I get on the tube, I go up to Brent. I said, I'll do it. I go up to Wembley Stadium. I get the keys to this Reliant Robin. It's a baking hot day in July or whatever it was. And I start this thing up, and it's rocking and smoking, and I had to have the windows open. Otherwise, I would have died from the fumes. And I drive up Wembley Way. I drive out I go to the first set of lights, and I'm sitting there with my arm out the window with this furry dice, George for Andrew, everything, and the thing smoking away. And this lorry pulled up, and the window was down anyway, and the guy leant out with all big tattoos, and he goes, "You wanker," and drove off. Because he thought I was like thinking I was really cool, but I had to drive the thing across London, and I remember saying to you, Jake, what do I do with it? He said, "Oh, just park it. We'll auction it or something." And I never did know whether they auctioned it. I put it in the underground car park there or something. But yeah, that was a bit of embarrassment. Thank you, Elton.
Elton John. Well, guys, thank you very much indeed. I've really enjoyed that. Some amazing insights into your 2 careers and life on the road. And thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Sorry to keep you, and enjoy your trip.
No, it's great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay. Good to see you again. Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much, guys. And Russ, spill the beans. Who have we got up on the next episode of It's Only Rock and Roll?
Well, we've got Stan Urban, who is a rock and roll legend at 81, still gigging, rock and roll pianist and singer, songwriter, played in Chuck Berry's band back in the day, does all the rock and roll numbers. He actually performed here in the Philippines last summer, and he's constantly gigging around Europe, doing TV shows and stuff like that. He's going to come on, and he's going to be coming to us live from a very interesting place in Denmark, where a guy called Henrik has brought it on himself to build an absolute replica of Graceland. Yes, Elvis's house. So there, and he's got lots of memorabilia, and I think we'll be looking at some of that as well. So very interesting.
Looking forward to that very much indeed. And don't forget, It's Only Rock and Roll, available on all major podcast channels from Amazon, Spotify, Deezer, and also on YouTube. See you soon.
It's only rock and roll.
A Phil Blizzard radio production.
Available on Apple, Amazon, Angami, Spotify, Deezer, Google, and all good podcast channels, and also now on YouTube. And if you would like to have a podcast production for your organisation, do get in touch with me. Drop me an email, philblizzardmedia@gmail.com.
A Phil Blizzard radio production.